Welcome to the Mighty Oak Show today. So glad to have you with us again and looking forward to a fantastic show. And as we jump into this, before we get to our conversation, I want to remind you, if you have not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please take some time to do that. We are constantly doing our very best to get new content onto the channel, whether that's interviews, shows like this one, other videos that can be a help to you, and that is our goal there. We'd love for you to subscribe, hit the notification bell. That lets you know when more content comes online, so you're always in the loop and in the know. And then go ahead and comment if you'd like, share this out. That would be fantastic. For those of you that are listening somewhere else, and I know that many would listen to this show through a podcast streaming service, subscribe there. That would be great. But also go to our YouTube channel. For those over at Mojo 50 Radio, again, we love our Mojo 50 Radio audience and the family there. Take some time, if you would, as well, to go over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the content, or hit the notification bell for the new content. And we'd love to share that with you. One thing I don't have to explain to anyone is that we are living in a strange moment in history. It is probably not the strangest moment in history. I mean, history has some weird moments in it, but certainly one that most of us have never had to navigate before. And one of the areas that, as a parent, I've had to ask questions about, and my wife and I have had to have conversations about, and talking to other parents and talking to folks who are looking down the road and saying, what do we do for education? One of the questions that has come up that perhaps has not been asked by many people before is this one. How do we evaluate what good education is? It seems like for many of us, we trust the local public education system, or we trust the local private or Christian school, or we are into some other form of education, whether it's homeschooling or a hybrid of that with charter schools. There's so many other options. But when life is normal, we go through a normal process of just doing the thing and not asking a lot of questions. And I think right now, parents in particular are in a place where they're asking real questions about education. And we're going to jump into the conversation, but I want to tell you why we're having this conversation now. When it comes to issues like mental health, and when it comes to issues like dealing with trauma and traumatic experiences, and we could argue that our country is in a moment of a traumatic experience right now, so much happening. The proper process of making decisions becomes really, really cloudy. And that causes stress. It causes stress in homes, it causes stress for children, it causes stress for communities that are trying to deal with these questions and grapple with these questions. And so I really wanted to have this conversation. If you watch our one of our other shows, The Imperfect Show, my wife and I talked about education a couple of weeks ago. And man, this is such an important conversation, and one that has a tremendous impact on the home. So I wanted to invite an expert in this area on, and fortunately we have one today. Dr. Ben Merkle is with us. And Dr. Merkle is the president of New St. Andrews College in Moscow, Idaho, not Moscow, Idaho. Moscow, Idaho, and I have gotten to know him a little bit over the last couple of months. In fact, we had lunch in Moscow a couple of months ago, and it was awesome to sit down and talk to him. His experience in this area is vast. It's very deep. He has a doctorate of philosophy in Oriental Studies and a Master of Studies in Jewish Studies from Oxford University in England. I have a hard time even saying Oxford University. A master's degree in English literature, a bachelor's in education with an emphasis on secondary education and chemistry with a minor in history. So a vast background, a deep background and understanding. More importantly than any of those criteria is that he was also in the Marine Corps. That really is the most important part of his resume. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. But thank you, Ben, for being with us. I know you're very busy, and really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this with us. Very, very important issue, and one that a lot of people have no idea how to even navigate.
Thanks very much for having me. I mean, it's definitely a pleasure to be here and an honor.
We want to get to the topic, but let's start with maybe your story a little bit, your background, where you were raised, where you came from. Talk about your time in the Marine Corps, and then how a guy in the Marine Corps ends up at Oxford University and involved in really an educational movement called the classical education movement, and we can talk more about that as well. But talk about that journey a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, born and raised in Boise, Idaho, Southern Idaho, uh, suburban, funny existence. Graduated from a public high school in '90, and remember graduated on a Friday, and on Monday was at MCRD San Diego.
Right.
Yeah, I actually, I was just mentioning I was in San Diego last week, and I drove my wife past the gates of MCRD, and it was like a strange kind of weird, creepy feeling, sort of goes over the top of me. But anyhow, yeah, I know I enlisted. I enlisted in the reserves and wanted to pay for college, but also wanted to add a little something to my life that I hadn't had before. I wanted to find, a way to test myself, and that seemed to be a great opportunity. There was a tank unit in Boise, so Charlie Company, as a tank crewman, started on the M60 and drove those for maybe 6 months. And then when the Gulf War started, we switched over to M1A1s. I was, I think, activated a, a couple of times. It was kind of a peculiar story. So I had done the deal where you do boot camp one summer and then you're supposed to do tank school the next summer.
Sure. Yeah,
And
sure.
the Gulf War launched in between those two. So when my unit got activated, I had not been at tank school. So I initially got the orders for being activated and um, dropped out of college, which was actually really handy because I was bombing all of my classes. And I think it was around November, and I was flunking everything. And I remember going around my teacher saying, goodbye. I know you'd like to fail me, but you can't because I'm going to defend your freedom. So too bad. But then, so I dropped out of everything. And then when I went and we were about to go, then the CO said, well, you haven't been to tank school yet. So you have to wait and we'll find you a tank school slot. And then you'll join us over there once you finish tank school. Made it all the way through Christmas break. They didn't find a slot, and it was somewhere. So I started college again in January. I think it was somewhere in February. I got my orders for tank school. Once again, I was bombing all of my classes, and I went around to my teachers saying goodbye. I know you'd like to fail me, but I have to defend your freedom. And, but I remember the morning of, I had the big party the night before, telling my friends I'm off to the Gulf War. And next morning, I'm in my service A's. Mom's crying as you're saying goodbye to everybody. And my order or my plane ticket gets canceled while I'm standing there. And basically, I mean, you know how the first Gulf War went. They were sending people home so quickly that so ended up never going anywhere. But you know, I joke, but I kind of think Saddam Hussein saved my academic career because I got out of all of those classes. So it eventually did go to tank school and started out my time at Charlie Company down in Boise, having fun driving M1A1s in the desert.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that young people need to have an experience like the Marine Corps, maybe not the Marine Corps, but something like that. It really does put perspective on the rest of your life.
Oh yeah, I needed that so badly because I was such a quitter, like I just in life I was not trying very hard, and I was one of like a classic kid. You can find him anywhere. The kid has all kinds of potential but won't drive himself. And that was a thing that I remember really getting out of the Marine Corps was just I would definitely say I got way more out of the Marine Corps than the Marine Corps got out of me. just to be clear, like, I don't know that I gave that much, but I did get just that sense of what it looks like. Initially, I think the thing that I don't think I even realized this till long after I was out, because initially I felt like, oh, I'm so hardcore, hard charging, we're up early, we're doing all this stuff. But it wasn't until later that I realized, so I have the ability to get up and go when somebody's screaming at me. But the thing that I really needed to learn was to be that person that
Right.
drives others.
Yep.
I wanted to become the kind of person that when I get up, the world has to get up and get to work because I make things happen. And
That's interesting. Yeah.
that was a real transition of not being just somebody who could take orders, but somebody who had the kind of self-control that could actually give and direct and drive others.
Was there a moment when that switch happened, or when you had that realization? Was there an event that caused it, or was it just you kind of grew into it?
A lot of it actually was a weird combination of being in the reserves, tank school, a few things like that, combined with college. It was when I was at college, I went to the University of Idaho, and my first year was a mess. And I mean, I was raised in an evangelical family, but everything had fallen apart. Parents divorced, and everything was a mess. So when I get to college, I lived like that. And then it was somewhere in my second year, I actually got involved in a Campus Crusade Bible study.
Yeah.
Suddenly realized just that gospel's true, and that needs to be lived out in my life. And the thing that I saw, that for me, living like a Christian meant quit living like such a pathetic quitter, like where I was just so lazy. And so for me, I decided, okay, if I'm going to live like a Christian, I need to learn self-discipline. And that really primarily came out in my academic work. So my undergraduate, I ended up doing chemistry, and I hated chemistry. It wasn't fun, but what I was doing was I was learning to what the drill instructors used to do to me with like push-ups, I was learning to do to myself with my brain. And I was trying to make myself work. And I graduated in 96, and my goal was to go into ministry by this point. And all the pastors I knew were teachers of one stripe or another. So I did chemistry education, graduated, and then I went into campus evangelism, working for a local church, doing evangelism on campus. But it was at that time that I'm doing evangelism on campus. And so this is a kind of a funny swerve. There was a guy that I was working out in the gym with. We would lift weights together. We wanted to use the University of Idaho gym. And because I had graduated, in order to be able to use the gym, I needed to be a student. And we figured it out. And I got married at this point. And I told my wife that I came up with some way where this was cost effective. If I took one class, that I could use the University of Idaho gym, and somehow that made financial sense. I don't remember how I could sell her on this, but anyhow, so I signed up for some class, and there was a guy in a Bible study that I was leading who said, well, when you sign up, you should really take this class on Chaucer with me. And I was a science guy. Like I didn't like chemistry, but I just believed that liberal arts stuff was dorky and for people who smoke pot and don't want the real truth, like can't face the real truth. And he was like, take this class on Chaucer with me. Chaucer is this 14th century English poet. And I just thought, that just sounds like the dorkiest idea ever. And he said, well, no, take this class and we'll sit at the back and make fun of the English majors together. And I said, yeah, that sounds like a noble cause.
I can do that.
I'm in. Yeah. So I signed up for this class, and we go in, and the first day of class, it was January. So we're in Idaho. So it's snowing outside, crazy cold, sitting in this class. The prof walks in, and this guy was former Army airborne. He comes in a pair of like cut off jean shorts and a t-shirt, and just lit the class up, screaming, yelling, swearing, throwing people out. I mean, he just lit it up. And then we hit the text, and it was intense. And it was like the most thrilling, and it was hard. It was real. And it was actually like really pleasant. Like it was just beautiful and stunning working through this text, and I just got captivated by it. And so then every time this guy would offer another class, I would take whatever class he offered. And initially it was for the gym, right? But the secret was because I was starting to kind of like English literature. So eventually he told me, well, if you're going to keep doing this, you should just get a master's degree. So I applied for the master's program. I started getting an MA in English literature. But what I noticed was, I remember one time there was one class that he was teaching where we were going through some of these medieval saints' lives. And in the medieval saints' lives, you'll have some Christian who's being executed for his faith. And the way you know they're a saint is they kind of live in this transcendent world where pain doesn't touch them, they don't hurt, and that's how you know they're godly. So you would like drop them in a vat of boiling oil, and they would go, oh, it's cold in here, could you turn up the temperature? And it's kind of that sort of thing, and that's supposed to be a proof of their godliness. So we're doing that, and then in the middle of this, and this guy is Catholic, but he stops and he reads to us from the martyrdom of Ridley and Latimer, from Fox's Book of Martyrs, which is a 16th century Protestant text. And it's a very different description where these guys are being burned at the stake. And it's like this really graphic, vivid, like these people feel the pain. And like he's reading this, and I look around, and And in this classroom, everybody's crying, and they're like it was just this really moving moment. And he gets done and he says, well, this is the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant understanding of what a saint is. And a saint is just somebody who's a real person who's just been forgiven. And it's not that somebody who like has spiritual superpowers that you never actually would encounter in real life. It's just like a real person who's been forgiven. And it struck me that like, I'm trying to share the gospel with all of these people. And I spend all my time out doing campus ministry with my gospel tracts, trying to get to the gospel with them. And here this guy who's a Catholic, Army Airborne, cussing and swearing and everything. And he actually got them all the way in. Like he had this class of 30 or 40 students captivated with the actual question that I wanted to talk about. And what I started realizing was that there's this whole genre of study that takes you to the fundamental core things in a far more profound way than a lot of our ministry attempts. And it was at this time that our church had started this school, New St. Andrews College, where I'm now the president, but it had just started there in the 90s. And I started teaching there. And what I started realizing was that when I was teaching in those classes, I was getting the nature of the material that I was working through, which was a liberal arts core, was getting me to the thing that I wanted to get to, the actual questions of the soul, in a far more profound way than most of my other ministry. And I really started to see this education as being really important for these students. And I was having more impact on these kids at NSA than I was on the kids that I was trying to share the gospel with. So that's when I moved into full-time here, decided if I wanted to really do this, I needed to pursue further studies. So I did the master's in Jewish studies and then the doctorate at Oxford, which I would say I did get. When I was doing this, I got the Marine Corps Tankers Association scholarship during my time at Oxford, which was funny. But
Did you ever send a picture of your Oxford graduation certificate to the teachers that were failing you the first couple of times? Because I absolutely would have walked in and showed them that.
Yeah, that would be an interesting conversation.
So a couple of things. That's fascinating, and I want to talk about if you can define for us classical liberal education and how that is different than what most people understand in terms of higher education. But you said you were raised in an evangelical home. Things fell apart. There was a moment where you realized, what you needed to be doing. What did that look like for you? What was the transition, or what caused you to go from I'm failing school, I'm in the Marine Corps, I'm trying to do stuff, to I want to be in ministry?
So I think that I was, I think I went through like this kind of dark time. A lot of it connected probably when my parents got divorced. I was a freshman in college when that happened, and it just sort of like, I think it kind of ripped apart a lot of what I had thought the world was. But I think I also had a fairly superficial understanding of myself and the world, so it didn't take much to rip that apart. And my defense mechanism during that was to just kind of see everything as black and with the old Rolling Stones song of Paint It Black. I mean, that was kind of like about a year and a half mood that I went through. And I think the thing that I was subconsciously telling myself was that nothing anybody tells you is true, that everybody's fake, that there's a hypocrisy, that this is, and that somehow, because I have to admit, during this time, there was never a moment where I didn't know God was true or that Jesus was true. Like, I knew that the whole time. I think I just tried to put up this like defense mechanism of telling me, but it's true, but it's unknowable, it's unworkable, nobody's living it out. And to be honest, I also was trying to not think about it, because I think if I thought about it very hard, I would know that what I was doing was not very defensible.
Yeah.
But it was getting involved in a Campus Crusade Bible study and then just meeting people where they were living faithfully. And I wanted to tell myself that that didn't exist, and I was starting to be surrounded by more and more examples of, no, you're lying to yourself. This is true. There are people who are faithful Christians, and this is not made up. And as soon as I saw that and kind of came to grips with it, then I knew I just needed to repent of how I was living. And again, I think the thing that I saw was this just laziness to everything, that I was just not trying. I was skipping all my classes. And so that's when I threw myself into my schoolwork.
Yeah. The testimony of others is so powerful, and it's crazy to hear you say that, because I think a lot of young people raised in Christian homes, we could define Christian a lot of ways, I guess, but defined in religious homes, they never really do have a testimony of faithfulness and consistency and hard work and living out the gospel, and just how important that is as a testimony to other people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is, I did not land in a faithful community, and it really took about just a whiff of faithful community to kind of pull me back in. But I got here, I lived in the dorms, I never left the campus. My social life, my everything was a very small couple of acres that was not very godly.
Yeah, that's right. So you went through that process and you started teaching at New St. Andrews. Can you define for us, or help those who are unfamiliar with this? When we had lunch a couple months ago, it was a couple months ago, right? Time is so weird. I can't remember when I was there. You outlined this for me, and it was helpful for me, even coming from a Christian school background. But can you talk about what classical education or classical liberal arts education is versus what we typically think of as higher education?
Yeah. So I wish I could remember what I said to you then, because I need to have those points laid out for me. I think it's a big subject, but really briefly. So there's a couple different pieces. Education as we know it now in America has really been transformed over the last 60 to 80 years into a very different kind of thing than what it classically has been considered to be. We now think of education as almost entirely and solely about getting you a particular job. So all education is about acquiring professional skills. And your college degree is now named after the job that you want. And people believe that if you don't have a college degree with a particular name in it, that you won't be able to get that job. It's all a mythology that colleges capitalize on, because they believe that they can jack up their prices because they can say, you're getting this degree, which means this job. So they can guarantee you this return on your investment, right, on and on. Anyhow, I think it's a bankrupt way of going about education, and that's a long other conversation. But it has distracted us from this far more fundamental thing that education was supposed to do, which is to basically teach you to think in a coherent and compelling way and to become a certain kind of person. And as a Christian, the Westminster Shorter Catechism asks that question: what's the chief end of man? And the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. You are made in the image of God, and you are created to live in a certain way that is really ultimately directed towards him. And education is about passing on to our children an ability to see the world in this comprehensive, Christ-informed sort of way, to appreciate it, to love it, and to serve God with all you've got. And a part of that is certainly your vocation, but it's far more than that. It's your family, it's your worship on Sunday, it's all of your life. And so a classical Christian education began really in the 1980s here in Moscow, Idaho, with the launch of Logos School, but it was an attempt to recover, not to invent, what had really long been the purpose of education. So you'll see this throughout the ancient and medieval tradition, and you'll see pieces of it all over America where people held on to or recovered in different ways this thing that we're talking about, which is the education of the heart, soul, and mind to love and serve God. And so you'll find that in the classical world, there'll be the classical Christian education world, there's an emphasis on the great texts of Christendom, where we're looking at the texts and the subjects that have been studied over 1,000 years that have been selected as ways to really engage the mind in this way. And there is a much greater emphasis on the more basic function of your mind, rather than on the certification of certain professional skills. So it's far more about critical thinking, about being creative, about being able to speak clearly, about being able to write clearly, to be able to communicate. You're emphasizing logic. You're emphasizing independent work. So it's far more about just the kind of basic elements of the mind, and less focus on the particular certifiable skills that get you a job. Because what you find is, and now I think that this is about loving God and serving Him, but what you find is when you've been educated in that way, that is a brain that is eminently employable. You can get somebody who knows how to use a spreadsheet, their Excel spreadsheet, but if they don't know how to use common sense and to be able to communicate, to listen to you and hear you, and to use common sense in how they employ it, then that skill is not very worthwhile. Whereas if you find somebody with this education that I'm describing, they're very quick to pick up something like how to use an Excel spreadsheet, how to code in a language. They can pick up those employable skills really quickly, but they're putting it on this more basic operating system that can do far more with life. So the K-12 classical movement, as well as NSA ourselves in this undergraduate education we're giving, we're really working at creating those basic skills. And they call it the liberal arts because liberal comes from the Latin word liber, which means the arts, the habits, the skills of the free man, as opposed to the servile man. You are learning how to be a free person, which means you're learning how to be a leader. People with this kind of education tend to be promoted more quickly within an organization because they have what are now described as the soft skills, the interpersonal skills that really create leadership. But it's not just about work. It's about your family. It's about your involvement in your church and your community and politics and on and on.
Yeah. It creates the foundation on which everything else can be built. And it seems like we're trying to build the house without having the right foundation underneath us.
Oh yeah, well it's my brother-in-law, who was an NSA graduate, now is a VP at an economic firm, and he was describing it. He said, it's kind of like in the early 90s when you would get these computers as kids, you'd get all excited about the graphics card and the speaker and the screen and all of that, but if the operating system couldn't support it, it was pointless. And we're looking with our occupational certification skills, we're adding the graphics card and all of that, but we're putting it on an operating system that can't support it. And so you get all these people that they have the diploma for this, but they have no common sense. They have no ability to get their head up and make eye contact with someone and just communicate and persuade and lead. So I see people who now, and the thing is, you need professional skills. Obviously, you need to get those, but you want to put those on top of an operating system that actually has what we're describing. What I see with our graduates is they do quite well in the workforce, even though we're not giving them a professional degree.
It's interesting because at this moment in American history, there is a very clear contrast. And I think a lot of what we're seeing culturally right now is the result of an education system that has not provided the critical thinking skills to its graduates. And so they're simply absorbing what they're being told. They're responding emotionally to everything that's happening. And in a lot of ways, our country's on fire because of college graduates who were never taught how to think. And they may know how to use an Excel spreadsheet or code or do whatever, but they have no idea how to think in the real world.
Yeah, in this moment, it's interesting. Everybody has their various champions of their causes, and you have people that you gravitate to. But have you, over the last 6 months, seen two people who have radically opposing worldviews able to sit down and have an intelligent and calm conversation? There is no, we are only able to speak to our own tribe right now. There's no ability to actually like have a conversation, which you used to be able to do. But that's gone because our education has eliminated it. And it's funny because I do think this is perhaps some of my frustration with the Christian world. When we think about education and we try to apply our faith to what's going on in education right now, the full extent of our being critical about what's happening in education tends to be some of the financial questions. You know, you've got kind of like a Dave Ramsey critique of the overspending on education, which there's a whole lot of valid critique about higher ed financially. Like it's a total racket and mess. And so I appreciate all of that, the urge to not go into debt and everything. But that's as far as we go in critiquing it. We don't go to the actual content of what's happening there. And so Christians are thinking that all they need to do is get a certifiable skill to get a job. And the thing is, you get a degree that gets you a job and you get a job. But when nobody has the education that teaches you to think, you don't even have an economy. Like it's one thing to just get a job, but what about like just to hold together the entire workforce and economy? That takes a far more fundamental level of critical thinking about how do we like endure this moment and this trial before us without just shutting everything down and like literally burning everything down, because that's what our world is doing right now. And a ability to use spreadsheets doesn't take care of this. It doesn't address this. You need to be able to think, and you need to be able to go out and lead, and you need to be able to argue, you need to be able to communicate and persuade and build a culture. And because we haven't been doing that, that's why it's all burning down around us right now.
And to be clear, you're not saying that a person should not, get a graduate degree in computers and science and medicine and whatever. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is that needs to come after the foundation is underneath the house.
Absolutely. Yeah, I tell my students regularly, I would never want to drive over a bridge that any of them built, with just their essay. You have to go, you do need to go. Now I would qualify that though. I would say a huge chunk of the workforce would be better prepared for by in-service internships and than college degrees. There are a lot of jobs out there that college is a poor preparation for that. And I see a lot of people who walk out of college and they walk into the career that they think that they just prepared for, and they realize that they've learned nothing about this, and all the training happens on the job. And if anything, they have to unlearn a lot of what they learned in college. So I do think I want to emphasize for our students, look for internships over the summer, and for those kinds of programs where they can get a mentorship, where I'm going to teach you to think, they're going to teach you how to work, because I think we're not good at teaching those skills. But there are things like mechanical engineering, medicine, nursing, where those require a certification that really needs to come from an academic program. And so I see, first of all, NSA is not for everybody. For the people that do take it, some of them will move from NSA straight into the workforce, figuring it out themselves. We get a lot of entrepreneurial types. Some move into an apprenticeship kind of position. Some will go on to a post bachelor degree, a certificate, or a master's degree, like an MBA, to move them into business. A lot of them go into law because it's a great undergrad for law. Some will go into medicine. They'll do a one-year post-bac certificate and then into medicine. So we're just providing that foundation, and then they've got to go somewhere with it.
That's fantastic. The perspective on that is, it helps to clarify kind of the confusion around education. And I've got two kids in college, both going to local junior colleges, community colleges, getting their start and trying to figure out what's next, and having a kind of a metric to run this question of what is next, where should I go, to run that through is really important. And I think that is what is missing in a lot of families. And I think why right now, at this moment in time when the government is saying some schools can open, some schools can't. Some parents are going to be forced to homeschool, while others are going to do kind of twice a week type thing or whatever. I mean, there's so many different options right now. And I think parents are absolutely overwhelmed trying to figure out what they should do. And they don't have a clear, here are the questions I need to ask. Here are the things I need to look at to make this decision. And, part of it is, we've maybe gotten lazy as a society because education is free in a lot of cases and access to education is really easy. That's become very difficult. And, on this show in particular, we talk a lot about trauma and the pressures of life and how to navigate those. This is one that's been foisted on the American family that I think most families just aren't prepared for. Can you talk for a little while about what that process should be like? What questions should a parent be asking as they're considering their options to educate their elementary school student or their high school student? The college students, they'll figure it out. but when we're talking about, I've got to send my kids to school in the fall, but I have no idea even what questions to ask. What are some of the questions you think a parent should be asking right now?
Well, so first of all, I get that it's really overwhelming. I mean, like it's overwhelming and it can be really, really stressful. It's stressful because your decisions are critiqued by everyone around you, and this is a moment where everybody's critiques now have the force of like, you're immoral,
Yeah.
So I get that it's really stressful and it's very hard, but that's the moment that we've been called to. Like this is where God has brought us. And there's a I forget which Puritan it was who said something along the lines of, there's a lot of times we look at who brings us a trial, but we need to remember who sent us the trial. So there are regular little crises that will descend upon you, and you look at the person who's coming in with this little crisis, and you're tempted to resent them in the moment. But you have to remember that this moment is orchestrated by a loving Father who has sent this. And so it's overwhelming, it's stressful, but it's also something you can pray through and know that this is something that God is intending for you to walk through with blessing in mind for you. So with that in mind, I think it's really important for us to see that, in Ephesians 5, we see a clear directive that parents are called to own the responsibility of their children's Christian education. And it is so easy to just offload that, to just say, well, the public school has got it, they'll take care of it, but that's not what God called you to do. You're supposed to take responsibility for the Christian education of this child. And I think we need to take that responsibility and that command really seriously. I've said it in a couple other settings, but I think that from a conservative Christian perspective, you will see a lot of people critiquing, complaining about what we call the deep state, this unelected bureaucracy that seems to control the politics of the nation, that we can't address them, and yet they seem to have this outsized control over us. I don't think we see how much that the real ultimate deep state is the world of education. The K-12, as well as our secular universities, that is dominated by a particular political party. It is a completely mono-party system. It is all a very leftist, liberal party that dominates that system. And because they have dominated it, we can't be surprised by the moment that we're in right now. That system has taken over and educated our children, and this is the result of that. So we can't abdicate. We really need to take responsibility for education, and we need to build a Christian education legacy. Now, if you're a parent and you're sitting there thinking, okay, so I take that seriously, but I have no idea where to go, I think the two simple ones on the K-12 in the K-12 world are either looking for one of the classical Christian schools, which are all over the place, and they are giving the kind of education I'm describing with a robust evangelical soul. They're all over the place, and if you can find one of those, I would really encourage you to look at one of those. Or you really ought to consider homeschooling. There are classical conversations, Logos Online, Veritas Online. There are all these different services that are there that can provide you the support network, the curriculum, all the know-how to do it. And I would just look up one of those groups. When we moved to England, we were there for 3 years. We had 5 kids, and we became a homeschooling family for those 3 years. We are not really good at homeschooling. Just say right now that
Who is?
not our spiritual gift, but for 3 years we did it. And the support network that's there for it is so much more robust now than it was back then. Some of these groups are really good at helping you out, and it can be so rewarding. There's serious sacrifice. You're going to sacrifice financially in order to do this. You can't have both mom and dad work and just send the kids off to a free public school. You're sacrificing in order to do it. But man, I would rather sacrifice my time and my money than my kids. I just see so many families that their kids are walking away from the faith because they didn't put the time in to give them the kind of discipleship that they needed through these years. And they were not watching and seeing how their kids were being filled with a ideology that was completely 180 degrees opposite and hostile to what their parents held. We have to take it seriously, and that means we have to put the time in to get these kids there.
Can you speak for just a minute to so a lot of folks in our audience would be either single parents, so they have to work, they have to do something with their kids, or there's a mom and dad in the home, but they do not see this the same way. So, the child is going to go to a public school or some secular institution of learning. If that's the case, how can a parent maybe not override, but certainly influence in spite of that type of education toward, the growth and the development and the learning that the child needs?
Well, I would say, first of all, God always meets you where you are. So if somebody hears like, oh, okay, so obedience apparently is this thing over here which I'm not able to do. Well, God never puts you in that position. There's always a step in front of you that you can take, and He's only calling you to take that step. So if you're at a place where those things are not possibilities, then those things are not what God is currently calling you to do. He's calling you to be obedient with the thing that's right in front of you. And first of all, I would say, give yourself to prayer. Like, really give yourself to prayer for your kids and see where that leads you, because it's remarkable what God does through leading you as you work through these things on your knees before Him. But give yourself to prayer. And then I would say this is where a strong church community is just really, really helpful. A solid community of believers that you can be within can really go a long ways for compensating for a lot of these things. So I'm blessed. We live in a church community that's extremely robust and vibrant. We have a wonderful classical Christian school that my kids go to, that my wife teaches at, and I'm the president of college. They go from there to here. So in many ways, we just kind of have it made. It's idyllic in that sense. But I see there are plenty of people in our community that are in exactly what you're describing. A divorce where the custody arrangement forbids them from putting their kids in a classical school. A single mom who's been left with nothing and has all these kids, and how do you, and each of these situations, what I see is the larger body of believers really stepping in and making up a whole bunch of that ground. And so I would say, be a part of a faithful church. And I would say the one thing I would say though is, a lot of times we come up with constraints that we invent for ourselves.
Sure. Yeah, that's right.
So if you say, well, there isn't a church like that around, well, move. Find a place where it exists and give yourself to that kind of body, because there's a lot of help you can get there.
The priorities and understanding what those priorities are, I think, is where a lot of people miss it, right? Is your job becomes your priority, your neighborhood becomes your priority, or whatever, and you have to step back and say, my number one priority is my family, and leading them to follow God.
Well, I mean, Jesus told us, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. And what I see is a lot of people saying, listen, I need to pursue all these other things, and the kingdom of God, I'll still have room for it.
Right.
And when you do your math that way, it just never works out. It looks like on paper, it looks like it's going to work, and it always edges Christ out. But what's crazy is when you say, okay, I'm going to seek first the kingdom of God, and I'm going to put that as my chief end. It's crazy how Jesus turns out to be good on his word, and all these things are added unto you. And what I see is a lot of students who came here saying, listen, I want to pursue Christ. I want to pursue Christ with everything. And I'm choosing this education for that reason. And then they walk out of here with fantastic jobs and a family and a house and a really great salary. I mean, it's not a health and wealth promise, it's not name it and claim it. But generally, that's the way it plays out because God's true to his word.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a great perspective. So off the subject of education as we come to a conclusion, because we are in a crazy time and people need to see things clearly, and so many people have lost perspective because they've lost hope. Where do you find the hope in the world that we're living in right now?
Yeah, I've had this I feel like for a number of years, this just pressed upon me, and I still don't know how to fully express it, but the overwhelming significance of having your eyes on Christ, of having Christ fill your vision, and how when you do that, all these other things start to fall away. And the truth is, if you're any student of the history of the church, there are so many people who feel like we're facing this, this unprecedented level of crisis that that America's never faced before, the church has never faced before, and that surely this is the end times, whatever. And the thing is, I'm sorry, but that's really first world problems. Like we've seen so much worse. This is the year that America stepped on a rake, and we have a lot of ridiculous self-inflicted trauma upon ourselves. Now that doesn't make it less traumatic, because this is a hard time. It really is hard. But if we keep our eyes on Christ, I would want to argue that this is the chance to do something fantastic. This is the chance to actually build something incredible. This is the moment where nobody has answers. All we hear are people screaming out questions, screaming out their anger, venting their emotions. What would happen if somebody stood up and spoke clearly in a biblically informed and persuasive way? Is maybe this is the moment where we actually can advance the gospel in significant ways. But we have to learn to see with that kind of eye that these crises are actually opportunities. I remember, there's some of the Marine Corps that comes out there. I remember the story. Was it? I don't know, I think it's Chesty Puller at Incheon or something. I can't even remember the characters that are involved, but it's the moment of like the news comes that we're surrounded on all sides, and the answer is, well, good, then we can attack in any direction. And we need to have, like, if you could have that for the Marine Corps, how much more could you have that spirit for Christ, where like you're serving the one who's defeated death itself. Like we need to learn to see this as an actual opportunity. So for us as a school, this has been the moment where we really leaned into this moment. We started putting out some videos that really just rattled a lot of people, but it's been this moment where we're actually significantly advancing. We're looking at one of our largest freshman classes that we've had in a long time. As everybody else is closing down, we're having to expand into a new building to hold all the students we've got. We didn't fire any faculty, and we gave everybody a raise as we're starting this school year, because we're leaning into this moment. And I think that, and you have to have your eyes on Christ, but when you have your eyes on Christ, then suddenly you get courage for the moment, and you see this as an opportunity rather than our own destruction.
That's awesome. Man, there's so much there. I wish we had another hour. I'd like to talk about that last 5 minutes. Man, incredible. And that is hope. I think a lot of hope, people are like, I hope I'll hang on. I hope I'll make it. I hope I'll survive. And what you're saying is the hope is focus on Christ and lean in hard and move forward.
Yeah, I think we hope for so much more.
That's awesome. Man, thank you for that. where can people find out about New St. Andrews College or follow you?
Yeah, nsa.edu. That's the webpage for the school. Look us up on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and Google New St. Andrews College. You'll see a number of the videos that we put out, and you get a sense of where we are, what we're doing, and what we're hoping for this year.
Yeah, that's awesome. Man, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for the perspective. And hopefully we can do it again. It's awesome.
Love to. Thanks very much.
Thank you. For those of you that are watching, again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time. Go check out New St. Andrews College. Follow Dr. Ben Merkle, and that would be awesome. You'd be blessed to do that. If you have not yet subscribed, do that. Subscribe on our channel. Hit the notification bell. That lets you know when new information comes online. For those listening over at Mojo 5.0, thank you for doing that. Take some time to jump over to YouTube and follow us there. Thank you, and we will see you next time.